You ever walk into a room and immediately feel the weight of it? Not the kind of weight that hits your shoulders physically, but a heaviness in the air, like time itself has slowed down just to watch something unfold. That's exactly what it felt like the first time I saw Charlie. He was a small Cocker Spaniel, brown and white, soft, floppy ears, big soulful eyes that seemed to hold decades of wisdom in them. And there, in that quiet little hospital room, Henry Walker lay in his bed, a man who had survived World War II, 98 years old, yet now fragile in ways that no training, no medals, no experience could prepare him for. From the moment you met Henry, you could see his life etched into his features, the lines carved by decades of hard choices, loss, and service, eyes that had stared down more horrors than most of us could imagine, and a quiet pride that he carried without needing to announce it. Henry wasn't the kind of veteran who told long stories about battles and medals. If he spoke at all, it was usually a memory in fragments, a place, a name, a sound that reminded him of something long gone. But Charlie had known him through all those years, not because Henry talked, but because he lived his life alongside this little dog who seemed to understand him in a way no human could. Charlie had been with Henry for over 12 years, long enough to be there through birthdays, quiet evenings, doctor visits, and more recently, the gradual decline that comes with age. Charlie wasn't flashy or imposing. He didn't bark at every passerby, but there was this calm, almost knowing presence about him. People who met him often said, "There's something about that dog. He knows Henry better than anyone." And they weren't exaggerating. You could see it in the way he would sit by the bed, waiting patiently, nudging Henry's hand with his nose, curling up at the foot of the bed just right, so that his warmth pressed gently against Henry's legs. Every subtle movement seemed deliberate. Then came the day when things shifted. Henry's health took a turn for the worse, and the family began to whisper, some in hope, some in fear, that this might be the day. Nurses were in and out, checking monitors, adjusting IVs, gently reminding everyone to give the patient some peace. And when they suggested to the family that Charlie maybe should step out for a while, that he might be in the way, Charlie flat out refused. He didn't budge. He sat by Henry's bedside, tail tucked neatly, ears perked, eyes fixed on Henry as if saying, "I'm staying. I don't care what anyone says. I'm not leaving." For hours, the room was quiet except for the low hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of a nurse. Henry's breathing was steady at first, but slow, deliberate, fragile. Charlie lay beside him, resting his head gently on Henry's arm when the man twitched or murmured, nudging his hand, reminding him that he was there. And Henry, well, he would occasionally murmur a word, a fragment of memory from decades ago, a name of a friend from the army, the sound of snow crunching under boots in the early morning, or the faint echo of a distant cannon. Each time, Charlie would respond by nudging him gently, pressing closer, giving warmth, presence, and comfort. It was as if the dog knew exactly what Henry needed without Henry ever asking. The family watched from the doorway, whispers barely above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Look at him," one of Henry's daughters whispered. "He knows. He just knows." And indeed, Charlie did. He was no longer just a dog in the room. He was a sentinel, a guardian, a companion who read every small movement, every subtle change in Henry's breathing. When Henry shifted uncomfortably in bed, Charlie nudged him. When a cough shook his chest, Charlie placed a paw gently on his arm, as if to say, "I'm here. I've got you." Time began to stretch in that room. Minutes felt like hours, hours like a long, quiet eternity. The family tried to rest in the hallway, taking turns, checking in, but they kept glancing back, unable to stop themselves. Nurses came in occasionally, adjusting blankets, checking monitors, and every time, Charlie would shift position to stay close, his eyes never leaving Henry's face. And Henry, in those moments, he seemed to relax just a fraction, murmuring a soft, almost imperceptible thank you, reaching for the dog's head to stroke it. The bond in that room was palpable. It wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't the kind of story you see in movies with swelling music and dramatic dialogue. It was quiet, intimate, profoundly human, and profoundly canine. Outside the room, people speculated, whispered, wondered how a small dog could exhibit such unwavering loyalty, how he could sense the gravity of a man's condition, and what it meant for all of them to witness it. Some said it was instinct, Some said it was years of companionship. But anyone who saw it knew it was something else, too. A recognition of mortality, of love, of a life shared, and the decision to never leave, no matter what. As evening turned to night, the light in the room dimmed, casting soft shadows over the bed. Henry's breathing became more labored. Charlie moved closer, curling up against his chest, resting his head on the blanket, adjusting slightly as Henry shifted. There was an almost reverent stillness in the room. Everyone present felt it, the kind of stillness that comes before something profound happens, a pause in time to honor what is unfolding. And in that quiet moment, it was clear, Charlie was not leaving. Not now, not ever. He would be by Henry's side until no one could say what was next. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers sent by family members, but the emotional weight was thick, almost tangible. Each shallow breath Henry drew was mirrored by Charlie's careful adjustments. Each subtle movement, each whisper of discomfort, was met with gentle reassurance from a creature who didn't speak, but somehow communicated everything that mattered. Hours passed in that way. The room became a world of its own, outside irrelevant. Time, pain, fear, hope, and love all coexisted there, bound together by the presence of a small dog who understood the stakes more than most humans did. And that's the thing about stories like this. They start quiet, almost unnoticeable, but they slowly take over, seep into your heart, and you realize you're witnessing something extraordinary. By the time Henry's family finally settled in for the night in the hallway, exhausted and teary-eyed, Charlie had claimed his spot at the edge of the bed, his body curved protectively around Henry's legs. He didn't need instructions, didn't wait for approval, didn't glance around for reassurance. He just stayed. And in doing so, he set the stage for the next chapter of the story, the moments that would define both Henry's life and Charlie's legacy. Because at that point, it was no longer about illness or age or the quiet countdown of a human life. It was about loyalty, presence, and the kind of love that transcends words. And if you've ever had a dog like that in your life, you know exactly what I mean. That night, I realized that sometimes heroism isn't flashy. It doesn't carry medals. Sometimes, it's the quiet refusal to leave, the unwavering presence, the simple act of staying beside someone who needs you more than anything else in the world. That was Charlie. That was Henry. And that night, in that quiet little hospital room, they taught everyone who watched them a lesson that could never be measured, only felt. The next morning, the sunlight barely made it through the thin hospital blinds, casting soft stripes across the room. Henry hadn't slept well, not that he could remember when he had. Age had slowed him down, but it hadn't dimmed the sharpness in his eyes, the quiet determination that had carried him through battles decades ago. Charlie, as always, was right there. He hadn't moved from the spot he claimed the night before, curling beside Henry's legs, occasionally nudging him awake just enough to make sure he was comfortable. There was a rhythm to their presence together, Charlie responding to every sigh, every subtle twitch, every shallow breath. And as Henry stirred, trying to sit up, Charlie's little paws pressed gently on the bed, almost guiding him back down with this insistence that said, "Relax, we'll handle this together." The family had learned quickly that the dog knew far more than they did. When Henry's breathing grew uneven, they would glance over, wondering what to do, only to find Charlie leaning closer, head resting on Henry's chest, eyes alert, tail flicking just slightly. He had become their little guardian. And it wasn't just instinct, it was something more profound. Every movement of Charlie seemed deliberate, intentional, protective. It was as if he understood that time was precious, that each moment could be the last, and that his presence could offer something more powerful than any medicine, any procedure, any human comfort. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, and offering words of encouragement. Yet every time someone tried to gently lift Charlie out of the room, he would resist, pawing at the floor, giving that soulful look that melted hearts, then settling back down, as if to say, "I'm staying. No one moves me." And so the day stretched on. Henry's condition slowly deteriorated. His breaths came with more effort, his movements smaller, frilier, yet every time he moved, Charlie mirrored him subtly, leaning in, nudging, shifting, so that his small body was always there to offer warmth and reassurance. It was almost hypnotic to watch. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet duo, Henry and Charlie, connected in ways that went beyond words. Occasionally, Henry would murmur a word from his past, a name of a comrade, a location overseas, a sound from a long-gone battlefield. Charlie would respond in kind, nudging a hand, pressing his head closer, as though acknowledging these fleeting memories and saying silently, "I hear you. I'm with you." By mid-afternoon, the room had taken on an almost sacred feel. Family members hovered nearby, some sitting on chairs at the edge of the room, some standing in quiet contemplation. They spoke in whispers, careful not to disturb the fragile bubble of connection between man and dog. And Charlie, sensing every tiny shift in the room, remained vigilant, his body slightly tense, eyes bright, ears angled forward. A cough from Henry would draw him closer. A slight shiver would make him adjust, pawing gently at a blanket, nudging Henry's hand as if to say, "You're okay. I'm right here." The day wore on slowly, almost unbearably. At one point, a distant storm rolled in, thunder rumbling faintly through the walls of the hospital. The sound startled Henry, making him twitch slightly. Without hesitation, Charlie pressed closer, curling his small body tightly against him. Henry's hand automatically reached for Charlie, holding him as if for life itself. And for a moment, the old soldier seemed to relax, comforted not by medicine or human touch, but by the unwavering presence of a small dog who refused to leave his side. The family watched, emotions raw. One daughter whispered to another, "I've never seen anything like this. He just knows." And in that simple statement was the profound truth. Charlie knew. He understood something fundamental about the fragility of life, about the depth of love and loyalty, and about the role he was meant to play in Henry's final hours. Afternoon faded into evening, the light dimming to a soft golden hue. Henry's breathing became more labored, each inhalation requiring a small effort, each exhale slower than the last. Charlie adjusted his position once more, resting his head gently against Henry's shoulder, pawing softly at his hand. It was the kind of quiet, attentive care that no human could replicate. Minutes stretched like hours. The tension in the room was palpable. Every breath, every slight movement, every flutter of Charlie's ears was amplified in the hearts of everyone present. They could all feel that something monumental was happening, that they were witnessing a kind of heroism that didn't need recognition, that didn't demand applause. Charlie simply existed in perfect sync with Henry, offering what he could in the only way he knew how: unwavering presence, warmth, and an understanding that seemed almost human in its depth. And then came the moment that would define the story. Henry's breaths grew shallower, more uneven, his chest rising and falling with increasing difficulty. Charlie leaned in closer, head pressed firmly against him, eyes wide, fully attentive. Family members held their breath. Nurses watched silently, careful not to interrupt the sacred scene unfolding before them. And when Henry's eyes slowly closed for the final time, Charlie did not move. He stayed exactly where he was, breathing slowly, offering comfort, absorbing the weight of a lifetime shared in silence, in companionship, in love. A single sigh escaped Charlie's small body, almost imperceptible, yet in that room, it seemed monumental. And then, after a few long moments, he curled up tighter, settling beside Henry as if to honor the bond they had shared, to remain a sentinel even after the human heartbeat had stilled. The room was filled with quiet sobs, whispers of thanks, and the soft sound of chairs scraping the floor as family members slowly approached to pay their respects. No one spoke loudly. Words felt inadequate. Charlie, oblivious to their tears and awe, simply stayed, his loyalty complete, his vigil unbroken. That night, the story of Charlie spread quickly. Family members recounted it over the phone to friends, neighbors, and eventually online communities. People were astounded, not because a dog had been present, but because of the depth of his understanding, his ability to sense, respond, and remain steadfast until the very end. And the more people thought about it, the more they realized that Charlie's actions embodied the very essence of love and loyalty. Not the superficial kind you show to strangers or acquaintances. Not the casual affection of a pet who sits on a couch and waits for treats, but the kind that responds to a fragile human life with intuition, care, and selfless dedication. In the days following Henry's passing, Charlie's behavior remained remarkable. He would sit quietly by the now empty bed, occasionally looking toward the door as if expecting Henry to return. Visitors would comment on his vigilance, his apparent awareness, and his continued devotion. And everyone who witnessed it understood. This wasn't merely a story about a dog. It was a lesson in loyalty, love, and the profound impact one life can have on another. It was a reminder that heroism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it curls up beside someone you love, never leaving, never questioning, never failing. For those hours and days in that hospital room, Charlie had done exactly that. People talked about the moments when Henry murmured a name or a memory from the war, and Charlie would respond, not with words, but with touch, presence, and unwavering attention. That small act of companionship became the emotional heart of the story, one that reverberated with everyone who heard it. And in truth, it was a story that had no need for embellishment. The simple, raw truth was enough. A little dog, a brave old soldier, a room full of love and silent understanding, and the quiet heroism that comes from being present when it matters most. And as night fell, Charlie finally settled down, still at Henry's side, still attentive, still loyal. The family left the room quietly, hearts heavy, tears streaming, but in awe of what they had witnessed. They knew they had seen something extraordinary, not the kind of thing you read in books, the kind of thing you see on TV, or the kind of thing most of the world even notices. They had seen love, devotion, and loyalty in its purest form. And in that quiet hospital room, the bond between man and dog had achieved a kind of immortality, leaving a mark that would be remembered for years to come, inspiring everyone who heard it to reflect on their own relationships, their own capacity for care, and their own moments to be present for those they love. The next morning, the room felt different. The air was still, yet heavy in a way that no one could quite describe. Henry was gone, but the presence he and Charlie had shared lingered, like an echo of something profoundly human and profoundly simple at the same time. Charlie sat quietly by the bed, eyes fixed where Henry had last been, occasionally lifting his head as if expecting the man to call his name or shuffle closer. It was almost as if he understood that the bond they shared had not ended with Henry's last breath, that love, loyalty, and presence could transcend even the finality of life. Family members returned, some weeping softly, others nodding in silent acknowledgement. They had seen what had happened, they had watched the moments unfold, and they knew that Charlie had given Henry something no medicine, no doctor, no human could. He had given him companionship until the very end. Weeks passed, and life around the hospital and Henry's home resumed its usual rhythm. Nurses and staff would check on Charlie, amazed that he continued to remain in that room for hours on end. Visitors commented, friends and neighbors called, and soon the story began to spread. It wasn't about a miracle cure or a heroic rescue in the conventional sense. It was something simpler, yet far more profound. A small dog's unwavering loyalty, a testament to the kind of love that exists without expectation, without pretense, without conditions. Charlie became a quiet legend. People came to see him, sometimes bringing treats, sometimes just sitting silently in awe, watching him remain by Henry's side, even when the bed was empty. And every single person who witnessed it felt the same thing, that the dog had achieved a kind of heroism that defied measurement, that didn't need accolades, that simply existed in the quiet act of staying. For the family, it became a daily reminder. They would tell stories of Henry and Charlie to each other, recounting the smallest gestures, the nudges of encouragement, the warmth, the way Charlie had shifted his body to absorb Henry's tremors, the way he had been fully present when it mattered most. It was an education in loyalty, in attentiveness, in love without expectation. And for those of us who saw it firsthand, it was an opportunity to reflect, to think about our own relationships, our own capacity to be present for those we care about, to consider the ways we measure heroism and devotion. Charlie had redefined both in the simplest, most powerful way imaginable, and there were lessons embedded in his quiet vigilance. Presence, as Charlie demonstrated, is often more important than words. Loyalty, as he showed, does not need grand gestures. Love, as he embodied, is revealed not in what is spoken but in what is done, silently, steadfastly, without thought for reward. People started sharing the story, not for fame or recognition, but because it moved them. They shared it on social media, in local news outlets, and in conversations around kitchen tables and nursing homes alike. And every time, the story elicited the same response: awe, tears, a renewed appreciation for the quiet, steadfast bonds that exist between humans and animals. Charlie continued his days as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, lying in the sunlight streaming through the windows, demanding his favorite treats, curling up at family members' feet. Yet those who knew the story could see it in his eyes, the memory, the weight, the legacy of what he had done for Henry. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. And as time went on, the family noticed that Charlie seemed to carry himself with a different kind of grace. Not a swagger, not a pomp, but an unspoken confidence, a dignity, born of the knowledge that he had fulfilled the ultimate promise, to stay until the very end. Reflecting on it, everyone involved agreed that Charlie's actions transcended mere pet behavior. It was an embodiment of ideals we all aspire to: courage, loyalty, empathy, and the understanding that sometimes the simplest act, simply being present, can be the most profound. There is a lesson here for anyone watching, anyone listening, anyone who has ever loved or lost. It's a reminder to cherish the moments you have, to value those who stand by you, and to understand that heroism and devotion do not always look like we expect. They can be quiet. They can be small. They can be as subtle as a Cocker Spaniel refusing to leave a bedside, sensing the magnitude of a life, honoring it in every breath, every nuzzle, every touch. And so, when you think about loyalty, when you think about courage, when you think about love, remember Charlie and Henry. Remember that you don't need to conquer the world to be heroic. Sometimes it's enough to stay, to be present, to offer your heart without hesitation, without condition, without asking for anything in return. That's what Charlie did. That's what Henry received. And that's the kind of story that reminds us all why we need to pay attention, why we need to care, why the quiet acts of devotion around us are sometimes the most powerful things we will ever witness. So here's my challenge for anyone listening. Think about the people in your life, the animals in your life, the bonds you may take for granted. What would it mean to simply be there for them in the moments that truly matter? To stay until the very end, just like Charlie did? And if you've ever experienced a moment like that, or had a companion who showed you unconditional loyalty, share it. Because these stories remind us not only of the depth of love and loyalty in the world, but also of the humanity within us, reflected back to us in the eyes of a devoted friend, whether human or animal. Charlie's story lives on because of the presence he gave, the life he honored, and the quiet heroism he embodied. And it's a story worth sharing, worth remembering, worth letting settle in your chest and stay there. It's a story that asks us to pause, reflect, and act with the same devotion in our own lives. Loyalty, love, courage, they don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they curl up beside someone you care about and refuse to leave. That's Charlie. That's Henry. And if we're paying attention, it can be all of us too.